So yeah, thank you everyone for being here. So today we have Jason Crawford joining our Pathways to Progress speaker series. I'm very excited to have this conversation. So before I introduce Jason, just like a little bit of logistics. So we'll talk for about 40 minutes, and after that, I'll open up the floor to a Q&A. So prepare your questions. Okay, and if you're interested in progress and progress studies, you likely don't need an introduction to Jason. You're very much familiar with him. So he's a historian of progress and the founder and the president of Roots of Progress, a nonprofit dedicated to building a new philosophy of progress for the 21st century. So recently they launched a really cool blog building initiative, which is sort of a career accelerator for writers, has written for the MIT Technology Review, has given interviews as a spokesperson for the progress movement for Vox, BBC, and other outlets as well. And well, perhaps most important, at least for me, he writes a fantastic blog, Roots of Progress, where there's a lot of essays about history of technology, history of progress, philosophy, a lot of different things. A lot of those readings are in our syllabus, as you're familiar with. And before that, Jason actually had a very successful and, if I believe, about like 2 decades long career in computer science, right?
Yeah, I used to be in the tech industry. Yeah, for almost 20 years.
So I guess I'll start off with this question. So Jason, sort of it's a pretty big jump, like it's still connected through technology, there's still connections, but there's a pretty big jump from your previous career to the career that you're, pursuing right now. So what was sort of the push? What made you move and change the directions in such a way?
Yeah, it was very organic. And so, by the way, sorry, I'm getting over a cold. My voice is kind of shot. I'm sorry about that. First, actually, let me just say, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I think this is a cool project. I've been chatting with the organizers of this program since kind of they were first thinking about it, and great to see it coming together. And so, thank you all for taking the time. Yeah. So in terms of how I got here, it was very organic. Basically, the Roots of Progress is a side project that took over my life. I never intended as anything, or originally intended as anything more than a blog. In fact, a number of books on a theme, and I decided the theme would be, maybe the Industrial Revolution, or maybe a little broader sort of tech progress. And then I very quickly decided to make it like basically the whole story of human progress. That was going to be my goal for my hobby for the next 10 years was going to be to learn the story of human progress and to like understand that thoroughly. And it was so cool that I started blogging about it. But right away, I mean, I just, I didn't intend for the blog to go very far. I think for the first 2.5 years, it had like 50 subscribers, probably mostly my friends. The posts were often very small and short and not very ambitious. But it just sort of grew very organically. I started doing longer and more in-depth posts, doing more research behind them. The audience grew. In 2019, 3 things happened that really changed my trajectory. One, I had my first viral breakout hit, which was my post on the history of the bicycle, asking why didn't we get the bicycle until the late 1800s? Why were there no bicycles in like the Roman Empire or something? And that went viral and like got a bunch of attention from different people, and started to really grow my audience. I got a whole ton of subscribers overnight. And then the second thing that happened was literally 2 weeks after the bicycle post, there was this article in The Atlantic that coined the term progress studies by Tyler Cowen and Patrick Collison. And all of a sudden, progress studies was a thing, and there was this community suddenly forming, and people were talking about it. And I was like thrust into the center of that community because I had gotten known for writing a blog about progress. Right. And then the third thing that happened was, for independent reasons, I decided to quit my tech job. So at the time I was working at Flexport, which had acquired my previous startup. And so when I decided it was time to move on, I asked myself, what am I going to do next? The natural thing for me as a former tech founder would have been to do another tech startup, but I didn't have a burning idea like for what the next startup would be. So I was going to have to like spend some time working on it, and I didn't want to rush that process. And I didn't have enough cash in the bank to feel like I could just spend 12 months with no job and like play with ideas or whatever. So I said, okay, well, the other thing I do is I can go get a job in the tech industry and join another early stage startup, you know. And I interviewed with a bunch and I got some offers and that was the thing. But then in parallel, I was like, I gotta, the thing I really feel like doing, could I just write my blog full time? Because that's kind of what I want to do. Um, and I was like, I should at least explore this while I'm like doing a tech job search also. And I basically decided it was possible, and I realized it was the thing that I was obsessed with. When I started a tech company in 2013, I did it because I was obsessed with an idea. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was the one idea I wanted to do above all else, very clearly. And I felt like I just, if I didn't at least try to do it, I would have regrets for the rest of my life. Like I'd always be wondering what if. Well, I tried that idea. It didn't really work out. Um, it was a burning idea, but I kind of burned it right out of me, and I didn't have, the next idea. But the thing that I felt obsessed with in the same way was writing about progress. And it was the same kind of thing where it was like, this is the one thing I can't stop thinking about. I would be very happy to do this all the time. Yeah, I knew if I went and got a tech job, I would need to keep the blog going as a hobby to feel complete. But I also knew that if I could write the blog full time, I would not need anything else to feel complete. And so that was a good sign. Like I should just go do it if I can. So I took the leap, but I never looked back. Here I am.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for telling the story. I mean, progress studies is better off of having you, as one of the spokespeople. So do you think that
Thank you.
your previous career, as a founder and just working tech industry informs and sort of informs how you approach, building progress studies as a field right now?
Yeah, certainly. And I think you'll generally find for anybody who makes a major midlife career shift, they find that the first career, there are many lessons they learned that informed the second. And maybe in some way they couldn't have done the second the same way if they hadn't done the first. Um, I mean, I learned a lot of lessons, life lessons and business lessons, lessons about how to get things done. Um, you know, uh, I mean, um, just the approach of like, I have a big sort of concept for a thing I want to learn and maybe write about, but I'm going to approach it by learning about a lot of little pieces of it. So I want to learn about human progress, which is this big, abstract, enormous thing. And what I'm going to read right now is about the history of steel or, the threshing machine or something like that, right? Like something super narrow and concrete. But you build up enough of those little concrete things and you ship those over time, right? So like ship early and often, and like, iterate quickly on your understanding. So there were lessons like that. I mean, I think coming at the study of progress with a technical background and an engineer's mindset made me get really interested in the technical details of the inventions. And I think that's a thing that I do better than most people is when I'm writing about the history, I actually explain what was the technical problem? Why was it hard? Um, and how was it actually solved? And I try to convey those details to a general audience. But like, one of the things that I'll do is I'll look at a machine or a system or a process or something and I'll ask like, man, why is it so complicated? Why does it have all these parts? What are they all doing? Couldn't some of them be removed? Right. I'm always asking, when I read about how people solved some problem, I'm always asking like, was that the simplest way they could have done it? What's the absolute simplest way to, right? Um, and that's whether you want to, do farming or whether you want to, make an engine or, um, you know, whether you want to sail a ship or like, try to navigate on the open ocean or like whatever. It's just like, what's the simplest way you could do it? Why doesn't that work? Why did we have to evolve these like more complicated ways of doing things? So I think, all that kind of technical and engineer's mindset helps a lot. Having a business mindset and like understanding at least some of the basics of business, um, helps when I'm reading about, um, various things to just sort of like, um, to have those concepts and understand how these different businesses were built in the past and the economics and so yeah, so there's a lot from that, that informs me, certainly.
Well, cool, cool. And also you're a very, like prolific writer. Like each year you output like tens of thousands of words. Not even talking about like talks and sort of like your links digest, like all of that stuff. Um, you're also like a president of a nonprofit. You have a lot of things like going on. So sort of one question I was wondering about is sort of how do you have like any suggestions, advice, methods, strategies for like other people who want to delve like deep into progress studies and I guess like other intellectual endeavors as well, and just like want to be prolific in the way that you are, for example.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Well, thank you for the compliment. I don't get to write nearly as much as I want to, especially these days. And sometimes I go long periods without publishing something, so I don't feel prolific, but it's nice to know that I'm perceived that way. Um, I think advice. I think the most important thing is to just get insanely curious about something. Find the topic that you are obsessed with. Find the topic that you just like can't rest until you know the answer extremely well. And like a lot of what I do is I just spend 10 times as long as any reasonable person would spend to go and like understand an issue. Um, when you hear about reading, a lot of people talk about reading diet and how you should read books. And like some people are like, you should only read great books that, are like worth rereading and stand the test of time and blah, blah, blah. That's a fine strategy. But for my work, I read a lot of stuff that is actually not well written and that I will never read again. Um, I read A History of Steel. Like it was not very well written. It wasn't super well organized. It had a lot of good content. Um, and I read through lots and lots of stuff and I dig through a lot of things that may or may not answer the question that aren't super, but like I'm like it's like panning for gold. I'm sifting through lots and lots of dirt and junk and I'm looking for the little nuggets and then I'm extracting them, then I'm making something, right? And then I extract all the useful bits, put it together into a coherent, compelling narrative and serve it up to my reader on a silver platter. That's how I think about what I do. So, but to sustain that, you have to be extremely motivated. So you have to care so much about getting clear on this that you're willing to go do that, right? Um, these topics, like getting that obsessed with a topic is not something you choose so much. It's more something you find, something you discover, right? You don't choose the topic chooses you. So just keep reading about stuff that's at least mildly interesting and like iterate your way to things that are more and more interesting until you find the thing that sucks you in so much that you just can't stop thinking about. Then go read everything you can about that topic and try to communicate your understanding to other people.
I see. I see. Well, thank you for the advice. Yeah, that sounds great. So, like you mentioned that you kind of like need to sift through just a lot of different sources in order to like understand the material. And like progress studies in like the current day and age, like it's still sort of developing, like I would say the curriculum that like anyone who like who's interested in it, like needs to read. So what would you say are the, I don't know, maybe ideas or books or blog posts or essays that sort of have like the largest number of those nuggets? Like what are the things that anyone interested in progress should read? Like, or maybe it's start with.
Let's see. Yeah, so on my bibliography, I have like a top five list. I think my top five books were Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch, Where is My Flying Car by J. Stores Hall, The Wizard and the Prophet by Charles Mann, and Rise and Fall of American Growth by Robert Gordon. Um, uh, those are all like really good and important. Have a lot of good information. We also have so somewhere if you go to rootsofprogress.org, somewhere there's a list of like resources that we put together for our fellowship, and like so we have a whole kind of like intro to progress studies reading list there as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So one question I kind of want to go back to, talking about your blog specifically. So as you mentioned, one of the biggest sort of like pushes to like, one of the things that like went viral was the essay about bikes and sort of why it took so long to actually invent them. So it's a fantastic, essay. I like it a lot. And you have other essays that sort of went viral, and more like interest from the public, or sort of like actually like they went viral in addition. So what are sort of the hidden gems, let's say, on the Roots of Progress blog that you wish more people knew about and read?
Let's see. A couple of my favorites that have not gotten a lot of attention. One was my history of the threshing machine, Why did we wait so long for the threshing machine? And another was titled "The Spiritual Benefits of Material Progress." So you can look this up.
Okay. So also sort of continuing talking about, I guess, like the bike essay. So one interesting thing there is that you kind of like identified is that, if I remember correctly, like one of the reasons that you proposed for why it took so long to actually like innovate and get to the form of the bikes that we have today, sort of cultural inertia. So people initially were trying to model like a carriage instead of like being sort of on a horse, for example. And also you sort of see stories of how something either was maybe invented earlier, like relatively early, but it took a while for people to realize its like progress potential, like potential to change things. Or maybe there's like, cultural inertia, for example, like in the case of a bike, in order to like, in order that's sort of creates these hurdles in order to get in the way of progress. So one question I often think about is sort of how often do you feel like we're trapped in these sort of like cultural, like local minima that sort of disallow us to like produce innovations that would actually like push us forwards in sense of progress? How often do you think sort of different like cultural, institutional ways like get in the way of progress?
I think there's a lot of factors that affect the pace of progress. Culture is one of them. It's a very important one. Do people believe that progress is possible and desirable? Does it have high social status? And I do think that is part of the explanation for the progress of kind of Western economies in the modern period. And I think also it is part of the explanation for the relative slowdown that we've had in the last, in the second half of the 20th century. I don't know. Let me just stop there as a high level answer, and we can drill into some specifics if there's something you want to drill into.
Okay. Well, I guess so you mentioned that there's like a lot of factors that sort of like can hinder progress. I guess what do you feel are the most important hindrances today? Like, sort of, if people want to make progress happen faster, what do you think are the things that people should combat today the most?
Yeah. So one, the growth of the regulatory state. There's a lot of just sort of burden of regulation right now that I think is, we have more than is ideal for creating safety or, anything like that. Two, the centralization and bureaucratization of funding for research, science, and other research, I think has has helped to create a culture of science where we can't make the same breakthroughs that we used to, or there's just not as much opportunity for it. And then number three is just what I mentioned before, the sort of the very idea of progress, right? Like, do people believe that progress is possible and desirable? Is there a bold, ambitious vision of the future that people see, that they believe in? Is there a future that people can imagine that they want to live in and are excited to build? And as a culture today, we've lost that vision of the future.
Okay, I see. Cool. Well, thank you for the answer. So, after that question, which is sort of like very high level and very speculative. So if it's too high level and too speculative, so let me know. But also, it kind of also touches upon this like thread that, like, at least I see a lot of your essays of like things could have. So there's a lot of cases of at least potential imagined history or something beneficial for progress could have happened much earlier. Like the threshing machine, for example, as you mentioned, or the bike. There are also cases where, like, I really like your essay, for example, about the eradication of smallpox. where it seems like the people who were doing it were kind of fighting against, institutional and organizational structure. Like it wasn't actually like it's some cases obviously helping, but also in some cases like sort of prevent. Sort of it's easy to imagine like an alternative history, or maybe certain things went slightly differently, and we would not have eradicated smallpox, which it's like clear benefit of putting idea into people's heads, like, oh, we can like eradicate whole diseases. Um, so why I'm like bringing this up is that if you look at history of sort of humanity, you can imagine, well, some things could have gone better, some things could have gone worse. And like if you imagine sort of different timelines, you can imagine that some timelines, some alternative timelines of human progress are like much farther along, where some might be like a lot further back compared to us. So if you sort of imagine this distribution, where do you think like our actual history lies there? How far along the like different potential progress pathways do you think we are?
I mean, it's hard to know because we've only sampled one data point from the distribution of possible world timelines. I think that I mean, my guess is that there is so look, in any given invention, there's a lot of randomness and contingency to when it comes about and where and who does it. And you can imagine it happening earlier or later, but when you average all these things together, right? I suspect that at a high level, when you kind of smooth out the bumps, that progress is actually like relatively predictable. That there's some kind of it's not inevitable, but I think that there's a certain there's certain background factors that affect the overall rate of progress. How much R&D capacity does a society have? How much surplus wealth does it have to invest in new ideas? How big are markets? How communication and transportation technology create larger and larger markets until today we have essentially global markets in everything. How fast does communication move? How good is the scientific method? How good are our institutions? How good are legal and financial institutions? How good is the legal underpinning of things like corporate law and IP law, like that. And I think those factors more or less kind of determine the pace of progress. And again, but when you put them all together and average them out, I think you get more predictable patterns at the high level. Just like in thermodynamics, the path of any molecule in a gas is sort of random, but at a high level, you have, temperature and pressure, and they're fairly constant, like they're sort of understandable, controllable variables, right? I think there's something similar that goes on with progress at a societal level.
I see. So there's sort of this like thermodynamical like law of progress where it happens, but like whenever you can sort of look at broader statistical properties. Okay, I see. So one more question I had about sort of like looking at the historical patterns. So as I mentioned, you kind of can see that maybe a lot of inventions were like undervalued initially if you sort of look at history. Do you think there's any like areas or like any specific innovations today that people should value a lot more than they are, which have like a lot more potential benefits and like potential to progress our society? Maybe like if some sort of like a couple issues were solved, but still they're undervalued today.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, did you want me to tell you which ones they are?
Yes. Which ones do you think?
If I knew that, I could just go invest in them, right? No, I mean, I think the problem is probably nobody knows which ones they are. Because like that's the whole point of them being undervalued, right? Is that like they're not the ones that everybody's talking about. I don't know. I think there probably are some things. No, certainly there are things that have not hit the mainstream yet that I think will be, I think fusion energy will be more important than most people are giving it credit for now. I think nanotech is super interesting, and very few people outside of progress circles talk about it, But like, I'm not going to name. I don't have the ability to name anything that that isn't already sort of generally talked about in progress and technology circles. And the most exciting thing is probably something else, right? It's probably something none of us are talking about yet.
Um, okay, well, so at this point, I want to like maybe like roll back a little bit, and so I'll ask a couple questions connected to a lot of definitions of progress. So first question is, well, simultaneously a very simple and very complex question, probably. How do you define progress? An associated question: has that definition, or the way you think about what progress is, has it changed over the course of your thinking about this question, or has it remained more or less the same?
Yeah. The word progress itself is pretty straightforward. It just means forward motion or advancement along some path. The real question is progress in what, right? Progress, what is moving forward along what path? I think when you add an adjective to it, when you say scientific progress or economic progress, like those are pretty clear things, right? Some of them we can even measure more or less. Um, Scientific progress is the advance of knowledge and understanding of our world, right? Economic progress is more wealth and infrastructure, more income, more goods and services, etc. So those aren't hard to understand. I think that there's probably the most difficult one to define because it's controversial and people don't agree on it is what does it mean? What is true progress? What is real progress? And because what you're really asking there, I think, is what do we actually care about? What is our ultimate end? What is our standard of value? What is the ultimate good that we want to advance? And even if you say something like, well, I think human well-being is the ultimate standard. And so when I say true progress, I'm talking about progress in human well-being. Okay, what is human well-being? What constitutes progress in human well-being? Is it just, more, making sure people are better fed and clothed and housed? Or is it making sure people have choice and opportunity in their lives to, live where they want, do the kind of work they want, marry the person they want, so forth? Or is it something more abstract and psychological, knowledge, curiosity, truth, beauty, excitement, adventure, romance? Is it something even, spiritual? Is it something about moral character? There's a lot of different things, and people debate this endlessly. Um, I mean, personally, I have my concept is that human well-being consists of, value achievement, essentially defining what you want out of life, and then going for it, choosing it, and achieving it. And that's a combination of both material, emotional, psychological values. So, definitely you need to be well fed and clothed and housed, right? That's the bottom layer of Maslow's hierarchy. But then we also need excitement and adventure and beauty and romance in our lives and all of those things. So I think, the reason that we sometimes just say progress is because so many of these things go together. Really, at the end of the day, I think progress is kind of um, there's an inseparable whole. Progress in science and knowledge, in technology, industry and the economy, in morality, society and governance, in human well-being, thriving and flourishing. All these things go together. They advance together. They don't move in lockstep, certainly, and one can get ahead of the other. And it can be very bad, for instance, when when our capabilities, when our technological abilities get far ahead of our moral and social systems. Um, but ultimately, I think they all move. They're all intertwined and inseparable, and they all move together. And so I think that's why we're kind of ultimately justified in just using the term progress sometimes without qualifying what type of progress we're talking about.
I see. I see. Do you think that so based on an answer, do you think that do you feel like people need to talk more about the like sort of understanding what progress is, or do you feel like sort of based on the answer that it's a question that is important, but maybe does not matter that much, and we should just actually like work more on like making sure the progress happens, and the definitional questions can sort of like be like emerge out of that progress.
I think we should talk more about what is our standard of value. And if we say that it's human well-being, what is human well-being? What does that consist of? I think those questions are not, you know, not fully enough answered. They're much debated, much discussed. People don't agree. I think we need better, clearer answers.
I see. I see. Right. Do you feel like there are any other, or I guess what other, what do you think are the biggest issues that progress studies as a field, both in terms of field building and in terms of questions that is like attempts to answer, like faces today? What do you think people should be working on the most right now?
Uh, there's so many things that would be worth working on that I think it's just I just think we need more people working on all fronts, at the same time. And I think that I wouldn't want to tell people what to work on because again, I think you should just sort of find the thing you're obsessed with. But if you want some suggestions, I think we need more history of progress, the kind of stuff that I write. I think we need more explanations of the frontier, like what are the technologies that could change the world over the coming decades? How do they work? What's not working about them yet? What's the bottleneck? What's blocking them? Um, I think we need more writing that addresses some of the sort of problems of the modern world from a pro progress, pro technology, pro human perspective. How do we solve climate change without degrowth, for instance? Um, how do we create AI safety without banning AI development, right? That kind of thing. Right? Um, and I think we need more work to really envision the future, right? To paint that picture of a future that we want to live in and inspire people to build it. So those are a few categories of things where we do.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So like a very solutionist sort of approach to this sort of question. Cool. Well, it's 1:38, so I'll ask one more question and then I'll open the floor for Q&A. So I guess I'll ask what, so we sort of started the conversation with like talking about sort of how you got into progress, so sort of about the past. So maybe I want to end this part of the talk with what projects are you working on right now that you're like most excited about?
Let's see. Well, I'm working on writing a book. That's a big deal. Working on the next cohort of the Progress Fellowship, the Roots Progress Fellowship, and also planning the first annual Progress Conference. So those are kind of the big things on my. Oh, and also I'm fundraising for all the above. So those are kind of the big things on my mind right now.
Cool. Very cool. Cool. Thank you, Jason. Okay, well then I'll open the floor up for a Q&A. So if anyone has a question, raise your hand or somehow indicate that you want to ask the question, and then I'll
let me just take a 2-minute break and get a little bit more water, and I'll be right back.
Sure, sounds good. Okay, so I see Michael has a hands up, so we'll go first. Anyone else have a question? Then please let us know.
I'll see how long I can sit awkwardly here.
Hopefully not for too long. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
All
Okay.
right.
All
Hey,
right.
Michael. Good to see
Yeah, hi Jason. Well, thanks a lot for speaking with us today. Good presentation. I guess I'm kind of curious about, and maybe I think a lot more about some of the risks or hazards to their long-term progress. So what do you think about the paper of Nicholas Bloom and others, Good Ideas Getting Harder to Find, which documents a pretty alarming decline in research productivity. So one, do you agree with their conclusions? And two, if so, what do you think are the main reasons that is happening?
you. I agree with their conclusions. I don't think it's alarming. I think it's actually pretty natural, and I don't think it's a problem. Um, there's a good Slate Star Codex post on this called "Is Science Slowing Down?" where he sort of gave some of the intuition for why this finding should not be surprising. I think part of the reason why people think it's worrying is because of the peculiar terminology that they use in that paper. The terminology makes sense if you understand the intellectual history of the field and what previous work in the field they were responding to. But they defined this term research productivity, um, and they defined research productivity as like um, the percent increase in the global economy that an individual researcher could make. And then they said that this was like, okay, so then they say this is declining. But the percent, like for it not to decline, what it would have to mean as the economy is exponentially growing, to make a constant percent increase in the economy means actually that the contribution of each researcher would have to be exponentially growing. Exponentially growing contribution per researcher in their terminology is a constant research productivity. Declining research productivity actually just means like a constant like contribution per researcher. So the way I think about it is basically like um sorry, just one sec. Coordinating with my wife on daycare pickup. So the way that I think about it is imagine that the frontier of progress is like a sphere. It's a big bubble, and we're all inside the bubble. And then to keep progress going, we have to push out the frontier. And all the researchers are like standing at the frontier and they're pushing it forward. Each researcher can push forward like a constant size area of the frontier. As we push it out, it gets bigger. We need more and more people to come and join and keep pushing it forward. You can actually maybe even you could break it down even a little bit more. There's both kind of like there's quantity of problems to solve or open questions, and then there's also the quality, like how difficult are those problems, right? So we pick off low-hanging fruit, so the remaining problems are more difficult to solve. And then also there's just the field expands and there's just more and more different subspecialties to dive into. So you get this burden of knowledge problem. It takes longer to even become a specialist to like get to the frontier, right? You have to spend more of your life in education to even arrive at the frontier and start doing your part to push it forward. Also, people again have to specialize more and more narrowly because of that problem. And so now, like, it's harder to make cross connections because you have these specialists. However, despite this, progress moves forward not only exponentially, but over the long term, it moves forward super exponentially. Um, uh, long-term metrics of progress like world GDP or world population or something, they're actually super exponential. As in, if you plot them on a log, semi-log plot, it's not even a straight line. It bends upwards. It grows faster than any exponential. So it's as if we get exponential growth, but the exponent itself is constantly increasing or continually increasing over time. And so that indicates to me that there is something else going on beyond simply ideas getting harder to find. Ideas do get harder to find, but at the same time, we get better at finding them. How do we get better? Well, we have more researchers, more dollars to invest, better tools, better communication, infrastructure, better scientific and statistical methods, all bigger markets to support the investment, all kinds of stuff. If ideas getting harder to find were the only factor, or even the main or dominant factor affecting technological progress, then the fastest technological progress ever would have been in the Stone Age. Because there's so many ideas were very easy to find in the Stone Age. There was so much low-hanging fruit. Almost everything had not yet been done. And yet, that was not the fastest era of progress. It was the slowest by far. So clearly what's going on is that these factors that make it easier and for us to make progress are actually growing even faster than the factors that make progress more difficult and challenging. So I think that's what's going on. And so I think the work that Chad Jones did, by the way, this basic insight that there must be some ideas getting harder to find factor is actually much older even than the famous paper about ideas getting hard to find. Chad Jones pointed this out in like the 90s, just looking at some basic data about TFP. The paper by Bloom et al., which included Jones on it, took the idea further and investigated it more. But that basic insight has been around for a while. And again, I think it's true, but they're just investing. What they are pointing out is essentially, I would think of it this way: rather than talk about ideas getting harder to find or declining research productivity, the basic insight is this: to maintain exponential growth requires exponentially increasing investment. If you want exponentially increasing outputs, you must also have exponentially increasing inputs. But that's okay, because the greater our economy grows, the more we can put into the inputs, right? Now, the real thing that you should be worried about is not that ideas are getting hard to find, but that population growth is slowing down. Because if population plateaus, then eventually we just won't have enough brains to keep moving progress forward. And things will slow down just because we run out of researchers. Unless we can create AI researchers who do all the work for us. And Chad Jones actually once suggested that there might be a kind of escape velocity type thing where, like, if we just get enough humans to get us to AI, then AI can take us the rest of the way. But if we don't quite get there, then progress will just plateau as human population levels off.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot.
Any other questions? Yeah, Laura.
Okay, first, thank you so much for joining us. This was amazing. So my question is, do you think the lack of extremes in progress studies compared to other fields and movements is a hindrance for its growth, and as well as to create great things? Even if you agree, first of all, if you agree whether there's a lack of extremes in progress studies. So I'm curious about your thoughts about that.
I'm sorry, did you say the lack of extremes?
Yes.
What?
Let's say compared to movements like EAC, where they very well define what they want to have, whereas in progress studies, the field is so much broader. And as Arthur pointed out, progress might not be well defined, even though you counter that. But
yeah, so so I'm trying to phrase exactly what you're getting at. and I'm trying to do it in a way that's not too snarky, but I'm probably just going to fail. So if what you mean is we don't have people who are extremely bombastic and go out there with very wacky ideas, then I don't think that's a problem. I do think that let me put it this way. I do think that ultimately for a movement to capture people's imagination, it needs to put forth a pretty bold and uncompromising vision and set of ideals. And I think we could use more of that within the progress studies movement. I was just reflecting on it this morning, actually, and I think that just a handful of years ago, it felt like progress was not really a hot topic. And I think, those of us who started very early maybe felt like the way to approach it was to build up a really deep, solid body of knowledge about it and to point out to the world why progress even matters, why we should be talking about it. In just the last couple of years, I think things have changed. And I think I think progress has actually come to the fore. And I think there's a number of reasons for it, but Frank, if there was a single thing I'd point to, frankly, it was ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT put AI in front of the world and showed people this is possible. And then very immediately on its heels, the AI doomers came in to tell everybody this was going to cause the extinction of the human race. And it basically launched mimetic warfare, right? EAC is just a reaction against the EAs who wanted to pause AI. That's basically what it is. I mean, I understand it as a reaction. I think that if you actually want to change the world and move things forward, you need more than a reaction, something you're reacting against, and you need more than memes, and you need more than wacky ideas about thermodynamics being the basis for morality or whatever. Like, you need a real intellectual foundation, you need a real vision, you need a real philosophy. You need real answers to questions like, okay, but how are we gonna make sure AI is safe? You can't just sort of hand wave that away and say technology is good, right? Therefore, AI will not be a problem. Because as soon as you start looking into it at all, you realize every technology creates problems. Almost every technology creates safety issues. We actually have to deal with the problems. We have to actually create safety by an act of will, by an act of engineering. So we need an answer to how we're going to create AI safety. It's just that answer can't be that we just won't build AI. There's too much at stake. So yeah, I think people who are a little more thoughtful and serious, probably it is time to step forward and maybe have our own manifesto and to write and to talk about our sort of our ideals and our bold vision, because I think it's out there, and I think a lot of us maybe are got used to talking about things in a more sort of measured and academic way. And there's value in that. But maybe we need someone to come along and paint a more coherent vision and value system.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Sam?
Hey, Sam.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for all that. I was interested just to hear more about your definition of human welfare as value fulfillment or value achievement. And sort of my specific question is, where do you see the good in there? Is it in the sort of the process of achieving values, whatever those are, or is it in the fulfillment of achieving those values? So sort of translating that to progress, do you see the good of progress as sort of the act of solving all the separate problems on the journey of progress, or finally arriving at that destination where all problems are solved? And then related to that, any thoughts on sort of if the former, if it's the process rather than the fulfillment, any thoughts on the sort of paradox or tension between how in solving problems you're sort of removing that the source of meaning, in that you need a challenge to sort of engage with? So I was just interested generally to hear how you I'm not sure if I'm along the right tracks here with how you think
Yeah.
about value achievement, but interested to hear your thoughts.
I think the process, it feels like a false dichotomy to me. I feel like the process and the outcome are inseparable, and either one without the other sounds bad. Like, you know, certainly if you had lots of effort and struggle and you weren't getting anywhere, that's not like a good thing, right? But then also kind of, the journey is very much part of life and the human experience. And having everything you ever want just sort of handed to you on a silver platter is not a satisfying experience either, right? Like, there is something very human in wanting to define a goal and strive for it. There's something very human about wanting to put forth effort. To the extent where, we make up all sorts of fake challenges for ourselves, right? Games, sports, hobbies, all kinds of things that we don't have to do, just for the experience of putting forth purposeful effort and striving for a goal and achieving it and experiencing our own efficacy and using our minds and our bodies to achieve something. So I think we'll always want that. That's very much part of being human. But you have to actually achieve it also, right? So they go together and are inseparable. I mean, as for, like, you solve problems and then it's you took the problem away. I don't think we're ever going to run out of problems. Not in the foreseeable future. Maybe in some distant future that is unimaginably, unfathomably different from the world of today. But there's so many problems left to solve. I think I think of progress as something dynamic rather than there's not a static end state that we are going for. My ideal is not a utopia. It's not a static end state where we have solved all problems. My ideal is a dynamic one. It is one in which we are continually getting better. We're continually moving forward. We're continually solving old problems, which create new ones, hopefully better ones to have, new problems that we will solve in turn. Our knowledge is continually expanding the frontiers and opening up new open questions. So we always have, more questions, even as we have more and more knowledge. And there's just this ever expanding frontier and an ever ongoing process of progress. So, I think there will always be things to do. Maybe the ratio of, again, the ratio of how many of those things are like absolute necessities of life versus how many of them are entertainment, fun, hobbies, games, sports, spirit, whatever, like made up stuff. Maybe that ratio will change over time until eventually, essentially, maybe all humans will spend all of their time like just like in the culture, right, where they play games, that kind of thing. But I think, as long as humans are humans, we're always going to want something to do. We'd get very bored otherwise. So.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Jason. Well, it's 1:59, so I guess 1:59 in San Diego, 4:59 on the East Coast, and whatever is your time in your time zone. So I guess we'll wrap up. So yeah, thank you, Jason. It was a very great conversation. Thank you for all the answers. So thank you for
thanks all. Yeah, thanks for your interest. This was fun. So have a great day.